Jesus, and God say, "Today, if you walk past us, you risk losing us forever." There's a season in life when everything becomes quieter and you don't even realize you're changing. Not in a loud, obvious way. Not in the kind of way people celebrate or even notice. It's quieter than that. It's the kind of change that happens in the spaces no one sees, in the moments when you choose not to react, not to explain, not to chase what once felt urgent. You begin to sit with yourself more. Not because you plan to, but because something inside you no longer finds comfort in the noise. Conversations that used to feel exciting now feel heavy. Places that once felt familiar now feel distant. And you can't fully explain why, you just know something in you has shifted. You start becoming more intentional, almost without trying. The way you spend your time matters more. The way you speak, the way you listen, even the way you rest. It all begins to feel sacred in a quiet, personal way. You're no longer moving just to keep up. You're moving because it feels true. And maybe at first that feels confusing, because you don't have the same energy for everything anymore. You don't respond the same way. You don't explain yourself like you used to. And part of you wonders if something is wrong, if you're becoming distant or difficult or disconnected. But deep down there's another voice, softer but steadier. It tells you that you're not losing yourself, you're finally meeting yourself. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply exists in the way you choose peace, even when chaos is available. In the way you step back instead of stepping in the way you allow things to pass without attaching your identity to them. You begin to understand emotional boundaries in a deeper way, not as walls, but as quiet decisions. You stop overextending, you stop explaining your worth, you stop feeling responsible for how everyone else feels, and you start noticing how you feel, maybe for the first time in a long time. And that can feel lonely, because when you change internally, it doesn't always reflect immediately on the outside. The world around you may continue as it always has, while you're standing there feeling like you've stepped into a different rhythm entirely. You might feel misunderstood, not because people are against you, but because they simply don't see what's happening within you. And how could they? Even you are still trying to understand it. There's a certain kind of silence that comes with growth. Not empty silence, but full silence. The kind that holds reflection, awareness, and a strange sense of calm that doesn't need to be explained. You start choosing peace over performance. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You stop shaping yourself to fit expectations that no longer feel aligned. You begin to realize that constantly performing, constantly adjusting, constantly proving was never where your peace lived. And so you let it go. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually. You allow yourself to be seen less and felt more by yourself. There's also healing happening, quiet healing, the kind that doesn't show up in announcements or big declarations. The kind that happens when you sit with something you used to avoid, when you feel something fully instead of pushing it away, when you finally give yourself the understanding you once searched for outside. And no one applauds that. No one sees the nights you chose reflection over distraction. No one sees the moments you paused instead of reacting. No one sees the internal conversations where you gently unlearn old patterns and begin to choose differently. But you feel it. You feel the difference in your chest, in your thoughts, in the way your days unfold. You feel a quiet stability forming, something that doesn't shake as easily as it used to. And somewhere in all of this, there's a deeper awareness beginning to surface. A realization that maybe life isn't always about doing more, saying more, becoming more in the way the world defines it. Maybe sometimes it's about noticing what you've been walking past. The quiet moments, the inner nudges, the stillness that once felt uncomfortable, but now feels like an invitation. There are things that don't force themselves into your life. They don't demand attention. They don't compete with noise. They simply remain, waiting to be acknowledged. And if you keep rushing, if you keep moving past them, you don't lose them all at once. You just slowly become less aware of them. Until one day you realize how much you've been missing. Not because it was taken from you, but because you were too distant to feel it. That's why this season feels the way it does. It's not empty. It's not meaningless. It's not something to escape. It's a quiet turning point, a moment where you begin to understand that not everything important in your life will be loud enough to interrupt you. Some things will only reveal themselves in stillness, in presence, in the moments where you choose to stop and actually feel where you are. And maybe that's what this is really about. Not becoming someone new, but no longer walking past what has been gently trying to reach you all along. Not missing it this time. Not overlooking it again. Just finally being still enough to notice it. If this quiet moment is touching something within you, you're not alone in feeling it, and you can comment, "I choose stillness" below to honor that feeling. You can gently subscribe to Born into Light and like this video if it resonates with your heart. And in that stillness, something else begins to unfold. Something you may not have words for yet, but you can feel it settling quietly within you, like a presence that was always there but is only now becoming clear. It doesn't come with pressure. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand that you have everything figured out. It simply waits, patiently, gently, for you to turn toward it instead of away. For so long, life may have felt like something you had to keep up with, something you had to respond to quickly, something that rewarded movement and overlooked stillness. But now, there's a quiet understanding growing inside you that not everything meaningful moves fast, and not everything true needs to be chased. Some things are only found when you slow down enough to feel them. And maybe that's why this season has felt the way it has. Why certain distractions no longer satisfy you the same way. Why constant noise feels heavier than it used to. Why you've started pulling back, even when you don't fully understand why. It's not disconnection, it's refinement. It's your inner world becoming more honest, more aware, more aligned with something deeper than habits and expectations. You're no longer reaching for everything that calls your attention. You're learning to discern what actually deserves your presence, and that changes everything. Because when you become more intentional with your attention, you begin to notice what has always been quietly present, not forcing itself into your life, but never leaving either. There is a kind of guidance that doesn't shout, a kind of presence that doesn't overwhelm, a kind of love that doesn't demand but simply remains, steady, patient and quietly consistent. And it's easy to miss, especially when life feels full, when your mind is occupied, when your energy is scattered across too many directions. You don't reject it loudly, you don't consciously turn away from it. You just pass by it again and again without realizing what you're leaving behind. Until one day something shifts. You pause a little longer than usual. You sit with yourself without reaching for distraction. You listen, not to the outside, but to something within. And in that moment you realize how close it has always been. Not distant, not hidden, not complicated, just quiet. So quiet that it required you to become quiet too. And maybe that's the part no one really explains. That growth isn't always about gaining something new, but about becoming still enough to recognize what was already there. Because when everything slows down, when the noise fades, when you stop performing and start being, you begin to feel a connection that isn't based on effort. It's not something you earn, it's something you notice, something you return to. And there's a softness in that realization, a kind of peace that doesn't need to be understood fully, to be felt deeply. You start to see that you were never being pulled away, only invited inward, not forced, just gently called. And all those moments where you felt alone, confused or disconnected, they weren't empty after all. They were spaces being created, quietly and carefully, so that you could finally feel what had no room to be felt before. Nothing was chasing you, nothing was pressuring you, but something was always there, waiting for you to stop long enough to recognize it, waiting for you to choose presence over distraction, waiting for you to realize that not everything you walk past will keep waiting forever, not because it disappears, but because you can become too distant to feel it the same way again. And now, standing in this quiet awareness, you can feel the difference, The subtle shift between rushing and resting, between searching and noticing, between moving past and finally gently turning toward. And when you turn toward it, even slightly, you begin to feel something soften inside you, like a quiet resistance you didn't even realize you were holding starts to loosen. And in its place comes a kind of calm that doesn't need explanation. It's not overwhelming, it's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with sudden clarity or loud certainty. It simply settles, like something familiar returning after a long absence, even though it was never truly gone. You start to notice how much of your life was spent just passing through moments without really being in them. How often your mind was somewhere else, your attention divided, your presence scattered across things that never really held you. And now, there's a shift. You begin to arrive where you are, fully, quietly, honestly. Even in the simplest moments, there's a different kind of awareness. The way you sit, the way you breathe, the way you observe without needing to change anything immediately. It all begins to feel more grounded, more real. And with that awareness comes a gentle realization that you don't need to keep searching in the way you once did. Not because there's nothing left to find, but because what matters most was never meant to be found through constant movement. It was meant to be noticed through stillness. There's something deeply human about how long it takes us to understand that. How we move through phases of doing, proving, reaching, thinking that if we just keep going, we'll eventually arrive at something that feels complete. But completeness doesn't come from accumulation. It comes from connection. And connection doesn't come from noise. It comes from presence. You begin to feel that now, not as an idea, but as something real inside you. A quiet steadiness that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't feel the need to hold on to everything. Just something that remains. And in that remaining, there's a subtle kind of trust forming. Not a loud confidence, not a certainty about everything ahead, but a quiet trust in this moment, in this space, in this awareness that you're finally allowing yourself to stay with. You're not trying to escape it anymore. You're not trying to fill it. You're not trying to replace it. You're just here. And somehow that feels like enough. There's a depth to that feeling that's hard to describe, because it doesn't come from anything external. It isn't given to you. It isn't created by circumstances. It's something that reveals itself when you stop moving past your own life. When you stop overlooking what is quietly present. When you stop assuming that what is gentle is insignificant. Because it's not insignificant. It's just easy to miss. And maybe that's the quiet truth that begins to settle in now. That not everything you walk past will call you back. Not everything will wait in the same way forever. Not because it disappears, but because you can drift so far into noise, into distraction, into constant motion, that you forget how to recognize what once felt natural to you. And yet, here you are, not because you forced your way back, not because you figured everything out, but because somewhere along the way you paused. You allowed yourself to feel something deeper than urgency. You allowed yourself to be still long enough to notice. And in that noticing, something met you. Not loudly, not forcefully, but gently, patiently, like it had been there through every version of you, through every moment you rushed past, through every time you didn't realize what you were leaving behind. It never demanded, it never disappeared. It just remained. And now, as you sit with that awareness, there's nothing you need to prove, nothing you need to chase, nothing you need to become in order to access it. Only this quiet, honest presence. Only this willingness to not turn away again. Only this moment where you finally stop long enough to feel that you were never as far as you thought, just a few moments of stillness away from what you almost kept walking past forever. And there's something about realizing that humbles you in a quiet way. Not with guilt, not with regret, but with a kind of softness toward yourself. Because you begin to understand how easy it is to miss what doesn't compete for your attention. How natural it is to keep moving when everything around you teaches you to keep going, to keep filling, to keep proving. You see now, you weren't ignoring it on purpose, you were just elsewhere. Caught in the rhythm of everything that felt urgent, everything that seemed necessary, everything that made you believe that slowing down would cost you something. But now, it feels different. Now, slowing down feels like the only way you actually arrive. And there's a quiet shift in how you hold your days because of that. You're not rushing to fill every silence anymore. You're not reaching for something just to avoid being alone with your thoughts. You're not measuring your worth by how much you've done or how much you've shown. You're allowing space, and in that space, something breathes. Something that doesn't need to be named to be understood. Something that feels like truth, but not the kind you argue for or explain, the kind you recognize, the kind that settles into you without resistance. You begin to trust that feeling more. Not because you have proof, but because it brings a kind of peace that nothing else ever quite did. And maybe that's how you know you're no longer walking past it. Because you're not searching for something louder anymore. You're not waiting for something bigger, more obvious, more undeniable. You're paying attention to what is already here. To what has been here. To what never needed to raise its voice to be real. There's a quiet reverence that starts to form in you because of that. A respect for the stillness you once avoided. A recognition that the most meaningful parts of your life were never hidden from you, just waiting for you to meet them differently. And you are meeting them differently now. Not perfectly, not all at once, but honestly, with less resistance, with less noise, with less need to be anywhere else but here. And in that honesty, there's a kind of closeness you can feel. Not something distant you're trying to reach, but something near, something present. Something that feels less like it's outside of you, and more like it's been gently surrounding you this whole time, waiting for you to notice that you were never separate from it, just momentarily distracted. And as that awareness deepens, there's a quiet understanding that begins to settle in a way that words can't fully hold, that what you almost lost was never about distance, but about attention, not about it leaving you, but about you drifting too far into everything else to feel it anymore. And now as you sit here, more present than you've been in a long time, there's nothing dramatic happening. No sudden answers, no overwhelming clarity, just this soft, steady sense that you're no longer missing it. That you didn't walk past it this time, that you're here, fully, quietly, here. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. Not the kind of enough that comes from giving up or settling, but the kind that feels full without needing to be filled, the kind that doesn't ask for more just to feel complete, the kind that lets you rest without questioning whether you've earned it. It's quiet, but it's real. And in that quiet, you start to notice how much of your life was shaped by the feeling that something was always missing. Like there was always one more step, one more answer, one more moment you had to reach before you could finally exhale and feel at peace. But now, you're not reaching in the same way. You're not holding your breath waiting for something to arrive. You're breathing here. And that changes the way everything feels. There's less urgency in your movements. Less tension in your thoughts. Even your questions feel softer, like they're no longer coming from a place of lack, but from a place of curiosity, of openness, of quiet trust. You're not trying to control everything anymore. You're allowing things to unfold without needing to force them into meaning right away. And in that allowing, there's a kind of surrender that doesn't feel like losing control, but like finally releasing a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. A weight made of constant effort, constant thinking, constant trying. And as that weight lifts, even slightly, you begin to feel lighter in a way that isn't dramatic, but deeply noticeable. The way you sit feels different. The way you look at things feels different. Even the way time moves feels different. Slower, softer, less like something chasing you and more like something you're moving with. And somewhere in all of this, there's a quiet recognition forming, almost like a whisper you can feel more than hear. That what you thought you had to search for was never separate from the moments you were rushing through. That what you thought you might lose was never trying to leave, only waiting for you to return your attention to it. Not with effort, not with perfection, just with presence. And maybe that's why this moment feels so still. Not empty, not paused, but complete in a way that doesn't need to be explained. Because you're not standing outside of your life anymore. looking for something to make it feel whole. You're inside it, feeling it, noticing it, allowing it, and there's something deeply human about that. Something quietly sacred, not in a distant or unreachable way, but in the simplest way possible, in being here, in not turning away, in not needing to escape the silence. Because the silence isn't empty anymore. It holds something now, something steady, something present, something that doesn't need to prove itself to be real. And you don't need to hold on to it tightly, you don't need to protect it or define it, because the more you simply remain with it, the more it reveals that it was never fragile to begin with. It was just waiting, waiting for you to slow down enough, waiting for you to soften enough, waiting for you to realize that not everything meaningful in your life will try to stop you from walking past it. Some things will simply let you go, quietly, until the moment you're ready to turn back without force, without fear, just with awareness. And now in this stillness, there's no pressure to move, no urgency to figure anything out, no need to prove that you've understood something profound. There's just this quiet, grounded presence, and the gentle knowing that you didn't miss it. You're not missing it, you're here, and it's here, and nothing is being walked past anymore. And as that settles in, there's a quiet easing inside you, like something that was always slightly tense has finally loosened its grip, not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer running from what hasn't been resolved. You're allowing things to exist without immediately needing to fix them. You're allowing yourself to feel without rushing to understand every feeling. You're allowing life to be without constantly asking it to prove something to you. And that kind of allowing changes the way you experience even the smallest moments. There's a softness in how you move through your day now, a kind of awareness that stays with you even when nothing special is happening, even when everything looks ordinary from the outside. Because it's not about what's happening anymore. It's about how present you are within it. And presence feels different when you're not trying to escape yourself, when you're not trying to outrun your own thoughts, when you're not trying to fill every quiet space just to avoid what might surface. Now, when the quiet comes, you don't resist it the same way. You sit with it. You listen to it. You let it be what it is without labeling it as empty or uncomfortable. And slowly, gently, it begins to feel like something else entirely. Not silence as absence, but silence as space. Space where you can breathe. Space where you can notice. Space where something deeper can reach you, not through force, but through stillness. And maybe that's what you're starting to understand now in a way that doesn't need to be explained out loud, that the most meaningful connections in your life were never meant to compete for your attention. They were meant to be felt when your attention became quiet enough to receive them. And for the first time, you're not closing yourself off from that. You're not walking past it. You're not too busy for it. You're not too distracted to notice. You're simply here, not searching, not proving, not performing, just present. And in that presence, there's a kind of closeness that doesn't overwhelm you, doesn't demand anything from you, doesn't ask you to become something more in order to deserve it. It just meets you as you are, in this moment, in this breath, in this quiet awareness that nothing is missing right now, that nothing needs to be chased right now, that nothing important is slipping away from you in this exact space where you've chosen to stay. And there's something deeply grounding about that realization, something that doesn't rise up loudly but settles gently, like a truth your body recognizes before your mind can fully explain it. You don't feel pulled in every direction anymore. You don't feel like you're constantly trying to keep up. You don't feel like you're standing on the edge of something you might lose. You just feel here, and that here is enough. Not because everything is perfect, not because every question has been answered, but because you're no longer disconnected from the moment that's holding you. You're not somewhere else in your mind. You're not somewhere else in your life. You're not walking past what matters. You're within it. And in that quiet, grounded presence, there's nothing left to reach for, only something to remain with. Something that doesn't fade when you're still. Something that doesn't leave when you stop chasing. Something that was never asking you to find it somewhere else, only to stop long enough to realize it was already here, And when that realization fully settles, not just in your thoughts but in the way you exist within yourself, there's a quiet shift that feels almost like coming home to something you forgot you belong to. Not a place, not a moment, but a way of being. A way of being where you are no longer divided between who you are and where you are, no longer split between the present and the next thing, no longer carrying that subtle feeling that you should be somewhere else, doing something else, becoming something else, becoming something else. You're not pulled forward, you're not pulled back, you're just here. And that here begins to feel deeper the more you allow it, like it holds layers you never noticed before, like it's been waiting for your full attention to reveal what it quietly contains. There's a sense of gentleness in that, a kind of patience that doesn't rush you into understanding everything but simply invites you to stay long enough for understanding to arrive on its own. And maybe for the first time, you're not interrupting that process. You're not trying to rush clarity. You're not trying to label every feeling. You're not trying to turn this into something you can explain to someone else. You're just letting it be what it is, and what it is feels enough, even in the parts that are still uncertain, even in the parts that don't yet make sense, even in the parts that feel unfinished. Because there's no longer that same urgency to complete everything. There's a quiet acceptance that some things unfold slowly, and that slow unfolding doesn't mean something is missing, it means something is being allowed to take its natural shape. And that kind of acceptance brings a peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. A peace that doesn't wait for everything to align perfectly. A peace that exists right in the middle of the unknown, steady, present, and quietly certain, in a way that doesn't need proof. You feel it in the way you breathe, in the way your thoughts don't rush as quickly, in the way your body no longer feels like it's bracing for something all the time. There's space now, real space. And within that space, there's something you're no longer overlooking, something you're no longer too distracted to feel, something that doesn't ask you to be different, doesn't ask you to be better, doesn't ask you to arrive as anything other than exactly who you are in this moment. And maybe that's what makes it so easy to miss, because it doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't pull at you. It doesn't insist. It just remains. And now you're remaining too. Not perfectly, not permanently, but honestly. You're staying with this moment a little longer than you used to. You're noticing what you used to pass by. You're feeling what you used to avoid. And in doing that, you're no longer standing at a distance from something that was always meant to be experienced up close. You're within it now, not trying to capture it, not trying to define it, just allowing it to exist, and allowing yourself to exist within it. And there's a quiet completeness in that, not the kind that closes everything, but the kind that softens everything, the kind that doesn't need an ending, the kind that doesn't need a conclusion, because it's not something you arrive at once and hold forever. It's something you return to, again and again, every time you choose to be present instead of absent, aware instead of distracted, still instead of constantly moving past your own life. And right now, you've returned. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, fully here. And there's something almost unnoticeable, yet deeply real, about what happens when you stay here a little longer than you're used to, when you don't rush to move on, when you don't reach for the next distraction, when you don't interrupt the stillness just because it feels unfamiliar. At first it might feel like nothing is happening, like you're just sitting in a space that doesn't give you anything to hold on to. But if you remain, if you let yourself settle just a little deeper, you begin to notice that it's not empty at all. There's a quiet depth to it, a kind of presence that doesn't push forward, but slowly reveals itself the more you soften into it. And maybe that's what makes it so easy to overlook, because it doesn't try to be seen. It doesn't try to stand out. It doesn't try to convince you of anything. It just is. And for so long, you've been used to things that announce themselves, things that demand your attention, things that feel urgent enough to pull you out of yourself. So something that simply exists without pressure, without noise, can feel almost invisible, until you begin to meet it differently. until you begin to realize that not everything meaningful will come looking for you in a way you can't ignore. Some things will wait for you to become still enough, open enough, aware enough to notice them on your own. And that noticing feels different now. It's not forced. It's not something you're trying to achieve. It's something that happens naturally when you stop moving past your own experience. When you stop treating your life like something you need to get through and start allowing it to be something you're actually inside of. And as that awareness deepens, there's a quiet shift in how you relate to time itself. It no longer feels like something slipping away from you. It feels like something you're finally present within. Moments don't rush past in the same way. They don't blur together as easily. There's a kind of clarity in even the simplest things, a sense that this moment, as small as it may seem, holds something real simply because you're here to experience it. Not thinking about later, not holding on to before, just here. And that kind of presence begins to change how you feel about everything else. You don't feel as pulled by what you're missing. You don't feel as pressured by what hasn't happened yet. You don't feel as disconnected from what is. Because you're no longer somewhere else in your mind. You're not walking ahead of yourself. You're not leaving yourself behind. You're with yourself. And in that, there's a quiet sense of alignment that doesn't need to be explained, only felt. A sense that you're no longer moving in a way that takes you further away from what matters. You're moving, if at all, in a way that keeps you close to this moment, close to this awareness, close to this quiet presence that was never trying to compete for your attention, only waiting for you to offer it willingly. And now that you are, even in the smallest way, it meets you. Not as something new, not as something distant, but as something that feels like it has always known you, always been near, always been part of the space you kept moving through without realizing what it held. And there's no need to hold on to it tightly, no need to make sure it stays, because the more you remain present, the more you realize it was never something that comes and goes in the way you thought. It's something you feel when you're here, and something you miss when you're not. Not because it disappears, but because your attention does, and right now your attention is here, resting, open, unrushed. Not trying to turn this moment into something more than it is, just allowing it to be enough as it is. And maybe that's the quiet truth that stays with you now, not as a thought, but as a feeling you carry gently within you, that what you almost lost was never far, never gone, never out of reach, just waiting for the moment you stopped long enough to realize you didn't need to go anywhere else to find it. And maybe that's what this moment has been quietly guiding you toward all along. Not a final answer, not a perfect understanding, but a return, a gentle return to what you kept moving past without realizing how much it mattered. Not something outside of you, not something far away, just something that was always near, waiting for you to slow down enough to feel it again. And now that you have, even in the smallest, quietest way, you can feel the difference, not in what you have, but in how deeply you're finally here. If this message stayed with you in a quiet way, you can gently subscribe to Born into Light to continue walking in this space. And if it resonated with your heart, you can leave a soft like on the video.